Right, time now to connect to our environmental efforts to nature. Julia Baker is Technical Director, Nature Services at Mott MacDonald, and is going to be sharing Speedy Hire's roadmap to nature positivity. Over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you on board. I'm Julia, Technical Director of Nature Services here at Mott MacDonald, and I'm going to be talking with you about nature positive, but also how Speedy Hire is leading the way. On the 12th of February this year, our government achieved a world's first when they required development seeking planning permission to deliver a 10% biodiversity net gain, and that is indeed a step in the right direction. We're now looking at mandatory biodiversity net gain soon for nationally significant infrastructure projects. So again, the legal bar, if you like, for our development to do more for nature steadily increases. Now, biodiversity net gain, if you think about our large construction sites or even our small ones, it's a way that we avoid and minimise impacts on our habitats and then deliver more wildlife-rich habitats afterwards. And again, that is a step in the right direction, and there's so many lessons learned already for mandatory biodiversity net gain. But I want to highlight that it's a step. It is one step in the right direction for our industry to truly have the impact that it should have on biodiversity. And what we need to move now forward is in the right direction in terms of the wonderful world of nature positive. So we have biodiversity net gain, which is very much site-based. It's all about sites and it's all about creating more wildlife-rich habitats. When we move now into the world of nature positive, we're now thinking about our impacts and our dependencies of nature across our value chain. But to start off with, what indeed is nature positive? There's a lovely definition of nature positive, a global society goal to halt and reverse the loss of nature, so that the global state of nature is improved for the benefit of people and the planet. Now, there's two things that I really love about that definition. One is it's a global society goal, so every single one of us has a seat at the table because we're all members of the global society. But the second is it's about improving the global state of nature to have more nature in the world for both people and planet. Now, I really love Rachel's point. Let's start with the why. And if you think about our industry, well, okay, we've got biodiversity net gain. Why are we interested in this global state for nature positive? I can't think of anyone who wasn't touched by the recent flooding and the devastation that it's caused, what happened so quickly, and it's still in the news today. And that's not only about the human cost of the flooding, is the significant cost to businesses, especially the small-scale businesses, but right across the board. And when there's impacts to our businesses, there's impacts to our economy. Every time we chip away at the natural environment, every time that we chip away at nature, we weaken our resilience to climate change, and actually we're making climate change worse. So if we think about nature positive, it's the risk of not doing so. And if we think about nature positive, it's actually business critical. We rely on the natural environment in construction. We really rely on it. So let's not bite the hand that feeds us. Let's have more nature in the world to simply be a thriving industry. I don't know about you, but I work with some of the most extraordinary talent that's coming out of our industries and our early career professional programs. Engineers, project managers, budget holders, and every single one of them ask me about nature, and every single one of them wants to be part of the nature mission. I've never seen such a generation who are committed to a sustainable world. So as a business, if we want to attract global talent, it's pretty clear what we need to do. We need to have a clear mission for genuine sustainability, and as far as I'm concerned, nature's at the heart of that. And if you want an example of someone who's doing that really well, then look no further than Speedy Hire, and we'll certainly dive into their nature positive roadmap. But my company at Mott MacDonald, and like many other companies, we all think about our emerging leaders, and we think about the world that we're going to be leaving behind. And when I first started, that world was certainly about the infrastructure, you know, the roads, the railways, the bridges. But now, as leaders, when we talk about the world that we're leaving behind, I've never heard such talk about the natural world. And I certainly feel this responsibility through my work, through my career, through everything that I can do to make sure that our industry underpins and supports the recovery and enhancement of nature for the next generation. So nature positive, it's about more nature in the world. It's a pretty simple concept. And as you can see, it's business critical. So what indeed is the role of business? It's a global society goal. So what exactly is the role? There's many publications about this, and you might have read some, or you might have seen the news, particularly as talks a lot about the recent COP16. I really like this publication. It was by IUCN, so it's an international publication that made pretty clear the role of business in nature positive. And it starts off with coming back to this phrase. It's a global society goal, which means that as a business, we're a member of the community. And as a member of the community, our job is one of service. Serve the mission, fulfill the purpose. And that's the starting point. And as a member of the community, when your mission is one of service, at the moment, what's happening in the world of nature positive, the international community, the academics are working hard at data, at the tools for science-based targets for nature. So our job is to support that, to be part of that conversation, to have a seat at the table, to take the data, to test it, to feed it back. There's so many consultation groups, and especially for companies such as myself, and shout out Speedy Hire, who are so vocal in the way that we're starting this journey, sharing what we're doing, because we recognise the power of that. We recognise our role, and certainly coming to a place when, as a member of the nature positive community, we're sharing what we're doing to support the cause and help move it forward. But there's more. There's certainly more that we can do. And this document from the international community said, okay, businesses, your job is to make a contribution. It's not to do something behind closed doors. Your job is to really make that contribution towards the global goal here. Now, we make that contribution by a series of steps. So we first understand our impacts and dependencies on nature across the value chain. We'll get into that. But by the way, it's just like carbon. All I'm asking nature is to be at the same level of carbon. That's all it is. So again, biodiversity net gain, it's great, and it's one step, and there's still work to do with biodiversity net gain. But when we talk about impacts and dependencies on nature and across our value chain, all we're doing is bringing nature up to the same level as carbon, and it's about time. So we also manage our nature-related risks as well. But the key thing is that we're moving nature into that business decision-making progress. And Amelia spoke about it earlier, actually, because nature has material value to our business. I just mentioned a few of them. And it's to really recognise that now and talk about it quite clearly in the way that we make business decisions. There's something else that Amelia mentioned, and you might have heard about it, TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And as Amelia mentioned, it's very much akin to the TCFD. The 4 pillars that we report against when we make financial disclosures, but about nature: government, strategy, risk and impact, metrics and targets. And targets, that's the box where you talk about nature positive. It's been extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary. So TNFD was published September last year, just over a year, and there's over 500 companies already who've made a voluntary commitment to TNFD, Speedy Hire being one of them. Now, in Britain, we're actually second in the number of companies committing and adopting TNFD. Now, that says everything. It's only been a year since it's been published. It's not even mandatory, certainly in Britain. And already in Britain, we can hold ourselves high. We can stand up and say, hang on, we've got the second largest number of companies in the world committing to TNFD because we recognise the value of nature to our industry, and we're here and we're ready. Now, with TNFD, there's a really useful framework. It's called LEAP, Locate, Evaluate, Assess and Prepare, where it takes you through the data collection that you need to report against the 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk and impacts, and matrix and targets. And the companies that are doing this, along with Speedy Hire, are taking those bold steps. And already people are starting to report against TNFD, and already they're showing leadership in this space. But we've talked enough about Speedy Hire. And I really want to recognise the work that went into the positive roadmap that was published. And the reason why I'm here today is to really talk about the start of this journey. And yes, It absolutely is a journey, because when you talk about it as a journey, and the really great talk earlier about the greenwashing, I really feel when I talk to a lot of companies about nature positive and TNFD, the nervousness. And people say, look, Julia, it's the big unknown. There's a risk that we'll talk about nature positive and then we'll be criticised for doing so. And I really recognise that. But the threat of greenwashing cannot hold us back from putting more nature in the world because of the importance of doing so. So absolutely, it's not about making a claim about nature positive. It's about saying this is our starting point. It's about being a member of the community and talking through each step as we go. So I really want to encourage you, if you're thinking about, okay, there's nature positive and TNFD, but you're nervous about a starting point, I hear you. And I've heard so many people talk about that. And we've had those discussions here as well. But rest assured, no one's expecting you to be a nature positive company, but we are expecting you to talk about nature positive, to come and join us, to develop your own roadmap, and I'll take you through some examples, and to have a seat at the table, because we can no longer afford not to doing so. And it's a lovely place to be a member of our nature positive community. So Speedy's roadmap, 6 steps. And the first one is set the foundation. When something's new like this, you have a new concept like nature positive or TNFD, you've got to set the foundation of good practice. Back in the day with biodiversity net gain, that's one of the first things that we did. We thought about our good practice principles here in the UK. So set the foundation. I'll go through the ones that we're using for Speedy, but there's many out there. There's UK Business and Biodiversity Forum, for example. So set the foundation of good practice. That's your benchmark. That's what you'll be working towards. Establish governance. So governance is who owns nature positive, who's going to be responsible, not just for making that global contribution, but also for embedding nature within the business decision making. We'll get into a little bit about measure the baseline, because that's that all important moment. Yes, let's measure the baseline of risk and dependencies of nature across the value chain. But the key point actually is number 4, prioritise. You've got to prioritise, and the trick is to prioritise about where your greatest impacts on nature are and which of those impacts are most material to your business. And it's that prioritisation. We cannot do every single thing when you think about nature across your value chain. No one is asking us to do so. So it's about that prioritisation, and then you get an action plan. You can set KPIs and take action, and then monitor and report. But as a starting point, set the foundation. And I'm going to come back to this document here, because it gave us principles to work towards. And these are all about nature as a whole. So again, biodiversity net gain is biodiversity and habitats, where we're thinking about nature holistically. Avoid and mitigate, of course, there's the first steps about how can we avoid and mitigate impacts on nature as much as possible. But it's about those holistic actions, and everything that we do is to make that contribution to the global goal of nature positive. Mainstreaming collaboration, part of the reason why I'm here today, to really talk about nature positive, to talk about the fact that we're on this journey. And then it goes into a transparency, just as well, and measurable. But coming back to governance, and the way that Speedy Hire is really leading the way, and the way that the Nature Positive Roadmap is certainly led by Amelia Woodley, who's already taken nature to the next level within this construction hire company so much, because it's where we need to be. So much of our impacts and dependencies on nature will be throughout the supply chain, and already starting this discussion here is such an exciting place to be. Then we get into measuring the baseline. So if you ever thought about nature positive and TNFD, and you're thinking about your impacts and your dependencies on nature, a really good place to start is actually go with what you know. So think about your sites. So just as a conceptual level, you might have depots or sites around England, and you would first think about your impacts on nature, or your potential impacts on nature. Now, pretty much all of us in construction, we will have environmental mitigation, which acts as protecting impacts on nature. So there might be noise and dust, whatever. But then you want to swap to the other side, where you're thinking about your dependencies on nature. So how are those depots or sites dependent on nature to thrive and to operate? And you might come across, when you run this analysis, something like what's called bioremediation, where nature can help screen some of the impacts on the surrounding communities or some of the impacts on surrounding nature as well. But you're probably going to be dependent on nature for climate regulation and climate resilience. And it's a lovely way when you think about your impacts and then you think about your dependencies, there's a lovely place where that comes together, because on the land, whether it be depots or sites or maintenance activities, you can invest in nature-based solutions that may buffer any residual impacts after all the environmental mitigation that you do, buffer those environmental impacts and strengthen the resilience to climate change. Because nature does that. Nature's pretty good and much better than anything that we give it credit for. So we can use nature-based solutions on our site, and by doing so, support the recovery enhancement of nature. We get that land increase in net gain, and that, as I said, is the first step towards nature positive. Now we come into biodiversity footprinting. There's a wonderful world about biodiversity footprinting, and I used to work quite a lot with some amazing carbon colleagues, and I did get a little bit lost in terms of the carbon footprinting world, so I was certainly nervous about starting to think about biodiversity footprinting. So I teamed up with the wonderful team led by Joe Bill at Oxford University and World Business, and we piloted their biodiversity footprint. Now, to show you how this works, you take your activity data. So you've got travel, food, built environment, natural environment, and you think about the pressures that that causes on nature. And there's a way that they can get really good data on this. So greenhouse gases, contribution of biodiversity loss, land use, water pollution, air pollution. So there's very clever frameworks that will quantify the impacts on nature. And what Oxford University did with their brilliant biodiversity footprint was translate that into a single biodiversity impact. Now, I worked with an engineering consultancy, and I just want to show you this as an example. And they said, okay, Julia, we'll pilot this, but we're quite interested in how this works with our office, right? We've got really good data from 2022, our daily office activities, of the electricity that we used, the gas that we used, our office food supplies, and the PPE that we bought. What is our impact on nature from that? But please do not ask us to collect more information. And I really understood that. You know, I mean, they collect data for carbon, they collect data for waste and recycling, they collect so much data. So one of their first questions was, we really don't want to collect any more data. Can you just run the biodiversity footprint with the data that you've got? And I said, hey, yeah, no, I completely understand. Let's give it a go. But the big questions were, what are our greatest impacts on nature? And what impacts are most material to the business? Now, with a biodiversity footprint, and such as the one led by Oxford University, it takes all of that data and it standardises it. And so you can clearly see, but out of the office, running the office for 2022, the biggest effort, if you like, so that might be spend on PPE or gas or electricity used, electricity, PPE, and office food supplies. Oh yes, those office food supplies. So I know that I've got 3 key areas of focus. Now, what the biodiversity footprinting does is that it says all of that has an impact on nature through land use, greenhouse gas and water. So you've got the red land use, the greenhouse gas and the water, and it comes up with a biodiversity impact score. But what this does, it gives you a really great direction of travel. So this first point isn't about the most perfect data set. This first point is about starting. Now, if you look at that, okay, so we've got electricity, and interestingly, their office used renewable energy, which is great. Of course, we want to use renewable energy, but wind and solar take up a lot of land. So with this biodiversity footprint, it allowed us to go past the renewable energy, which is obviously good, and go one step deeper into the world of sustainability. We're like, we need to find those renewable energy suppliers who are doing great things for nature. And that's it. It just signposted the way to us go one step deeper. And there's some fantastic work being done about the wind farms and the solar panels. They're really coming through with impacts on nature on their sites as well. The other one, we're probably all slightly guilty of this, office food supplies. It's such a quick win. And there's some amazing brands out there now. So through the spend in office food supplies, it's a brilliant way to invest and support the regenerative agricultural industry. And let's all make that change. But interestingly, so this was an engineering consultancy. And out of all that they were doing and all of the spend, one of their greatest impacts on nature was spend on PPE. So the land, the water use, all of that has an impact on nature. So again, it gave a really interesting and important direction of travel. One, certainly for the staff, let's protect our PPE because that has an impact on nature. But it's also a lovely way to work with our suppliers of the PPE. We started a few conversations, and one thing, and actually I was talking to Amelia about this another time, it's such a careful conversation. Because with our supply chain, we're like, look, we know that we ask you for a lot already. We know that we ask you about carbon. We know that we ask you about modern slavery. We don't want to add nature to the list, but we do want to start asking you because you supply our PPE and you have an important part in our nature positive journey. And we spoke to a couple of companies. I really want to recognise them. They said, look, we're up for it. You know, we're really up for it. And it's a way of making sure and coming back to this place that we're all part of the community. It's not about suddenly putting in new questions and firing off and asking for data. It's a way to bring people along. And certainly that's the approach with Speedy here. So as we move through Speedy's roadmap, we're now at the stage when we're going to start measuring the baseline and pressure off. We don't have the data or the biodiversity footprinting tools for this to be perfect. But we do have good enough data. We do have good enough tools, such as the one from Oxford University, to really say, well, actually, as a starting point, this is what we think are our impacts on nature, and this is our most material to our business, and this is where we're going to start, because the key thing is, if you're going to start with nature positive and TNFD, is to really think about that prioritization. And it's certainly not a place to say, no, we're not going to start, we're going to wait. It's a place to say, okay, I'm in. I want to learn and I want to help and I want to support, and then we can all work together. So watch this space. I'm delighted to speak to you today at the Speedy Live Summit about our plans for Nature Positive, but watch this space because there'll be certainly plenty more to come. Thank you very much.
Julia, thank you ever so much. Thank you for highlighting just how we can incorporate nature positivity into our plans. It is, as I'm sure you'll agree, an essential reminder of the broader connections between sustainability and our wonderful natural world.